British demand for Chinese goods, porcelain, silk, and tea increased massively, but Britain was reluctant to hand over silver to get them. Finally, Britain found a commodity that China would take: opium. Imported from India. Just a few chests at first, and then thousands. When the Chinese authorities tried to stop the opium trade, the British sent in their gunboats. After nearly 20 years of turmoil, the Treaty of Tianjin in 1858 not only allowed opium to be imported, but handed over China's ports and all her international trade to Western control. After the war, opium poured into China on an even greater scale, and her emperors were powerless to stop it. The fury of the Dragon Throne was now a pale imitation of what it had been in the past. But the response was to retreat further behind the walls of the Forbidden City and pretend that nothing had changed. The notorious Dowager Empress Cixi personified this flight from reality. In the 1880s, the Forbidden City was practically hers. At 16, she had been a lowly concubine to the emperor. When the emperor died, Cixi organized a coup and installed her 6-year-old son on the Dragon Throne. It was a cynical but brilliant maneuver, for when he grew up, Tongji had a complete lack of interest in the government, preferring self-indulgence to state administration. But pretenses were kept up. Officials would come here to the Hall of Mental Cultivation for audiences with the teenage emperor. Inside the hall, on the imperial throne, sat Tongji. It was to him that the court officials presented the dispatches, in the full knowledge that the real power was literally behind the throne. Though invisible, masked by the silk curtain, it was the Dowager Empress Cixi who ruled the empire.
I have often thought that I am the cleverest woman who ever lived, and that others cannot compare with me. I have heard much about Queen Victoria, but her life is not half as interesting as mine. Now look at me. I have 400 million people, all dependent on my judgment.
It was an empty boast. In fact, the Dragon Throne had become isolated and decadent. When the young emperor died of smallpox, the Empress Dowager arranged the death of his pregnant wife soon after. Then she placed her nephew, another child, on the Dragon Throne. Cixi continued to pull the strings from behind the silk curtain. It was scarcely a victory. To control the Forbidden City no longer meant to control China. Court life in the time of the Empress Dowager was, on the face of it, the same as it had always been in the Forbidden City. Elaborate operas were still staged by the eunuchs and still enjoyed by those around the Dragon Throne. But such adherence to ritual masked the problems of the Chinese Empire. Problems Cixi refused to address. As the 19th century drew to a close, rebellion and riots erupted across the nation. But this was not just another peasants' revolt. It was the uprising of the Boxers. This was the name given to the starving peasants who wanted to purge the empire of the Western barbarians. Their rebellion produced a bloodbath. Reprisals were severe when troops from the West arrived in force. The confusion spread to Beijing, and in a panic, the imperial family fled the Forbidden City. Western soldiers entered its gates, and for the first time, outsiders stood uninvited at the Dragon Throne and stayed. Qixi returned, shamefaced, to become a lodger and a curio in her own palace. After years of pulling the strings, she became the puppet, kept in place by the grace of the barbarians. After she died, the last emperor took his place on the Dragon Throne, a 3-year-old Pu Yi.
When they carried me into the Hall of Supreme Harmony and put me onto the high and enormous throne, I could bear it no longer. They told me not to fidget, but I struggled and cried. I don't like it here. I want to go home. As the officials went on kowtowing to me, my cries grew louder and louder. My father tried to soothe me by saying, "Don't cry, don't cry. It will soon be finished. It will soon be finished."
3 years later, a popular uprising swept through China, and the imperium that was meant to last an eternity came to an end. On the 12th of February, the emperor, the last emperor, abdicated the throne. The new Republican government allowed Pu Yi and his small household staff to remain in the inner court until 1924. In 1925, the Son of Heaven was evicted, and like China, his life entered a period of bewildering change. Gone forever were the 1,000 yellow robes.